winter came back. What's going on? So nobody was watching and sneaking in the door. It's only going to be here for a couple of days. We have the great privilege today of hearing from the most ethical person I know. At least that's what the science is.
It's a lot of pressure.
Professor Brian Levey has been here at Notre Dame for 5 years?
5 years.
5 years. He came here from the Washington, D.C. area, where he was the chief ethics officer for a company you may have heard of, Fannie Mae. I don't know whether he's going to talk about that or not, but at Notre Dame he teaches business law courses, he teaches ethics courses, courses in compliance, courses in ethics and accounting, and besides that, he's just really a great guy. So please give Brian Levey.
Well, thanks, Doug. As Doug said, I teach a couple different classes here, business law, a few different ethics classes, and we'll talk about that as we go through here. So a little overview of the presentation. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background, ethics in the Mendoza College of Business. And I'm here to tell you, without ethics, there is no business. And you can just ask the shareholders of News Corp, and we'll talk about BP a little bit too. And so here at Mendoza, we ask more of business, and we ask you to ask more of yourself. So let's start with my background. Like many of you, I dreamed of going to the University of Notre Dame, and so I did. After graduation, I went off to Washington, D.C. Heard they had a dome there, not as nice as ours. Graduated from law school, married Allison. Some of you may have seen Allison at freshman pin night or sophomore pin night. She works with Doug and Sam. There she is, Walsh Hall, class of '84. Anyone from Walsh Hall? Ladies? A few Walsh. Wild women of Walsh. And then we had a son, Connor. This is how I like to remember him, because he used to run to the door and he'd say, "Daddy's home," and now he is a 6'8" senior over here at St. Joe High School, so he's coming to Notre Dame next year. So if you need someone for bookstore basketball, he might be a good pick for you next year. After law school, went to work for a couple different law firms and a few different companies in the DC area. We had clients at the law firms anyway, like GE and General Dynamics. Then I went to work for a subsidiary of Black & Decker. And then a company called MCI. You're probably just old enough to remember MCI. That was the annoying long-distance company that used to call you at dinner time and ask you to switch your long distance from AT&T. And here's a company I think you've probably heard of, Worldcom. Worldcom bought us. Okay, and I remember this day like it was yesterday. Although it was 10 years ago, we were living in Vienna, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. I walked down the driveway to pick up the Washington Post to see how my Boston Red Sox had done. It was a sunny morning, birds are singing, clear sky, everything's great. And then you pick up the newspaper, and on the front page of the Washington Post, it says, Worldcom says its books are off by $3.8 billion. Oh my God, okay? This is your employer. This is the company you work for. It's disclosed that it has essentially cooked the books, okay? And little did I think when I was a freshman here at Notre Dame that someday I'd work for a company where I would see the controller and the CFO and the CEO do the perp walk on national TV, right? That's not something you think of when you're looking forward to your career in business, okay? So Worldcom, let's talk a little bit about Worldcom. What did we do? In essence, we cooked the books. We committed accounting fraud. Originally, we said the fraud was $3.8 billion. We laid off 17,000 workers. We filed a record bankruptcy, paid a $750 million fine. The $3.8 billion grew to $11 billion when everything was said and done. And our CEO, or former CEO, I guess I should say, he is now serving 25 years in prison. I guess the good news for me was, if you want to call it that, I got to help start the Worldcom Ethics Office. It's sort of an oxymoron, right? The Worldcom Ethics Office. And there's Matt Packman in the middle. Matt was the first chief ethics officer at Worldcom. And people used to say, Matt, what's it like to be the chief ethics officer at Worldcom? And he would say, at least we didn't kill anybody, right? Nobody died in our accounting scandal, okay? All we did was cook the books, all right? And I guess when you've cooked the books to the tune of $11 billion, that's something that you cling to, all right? So what did we do? We put in place a code of conduct, an ethics helpline. We trained all of our employees. And from there, I went to work for a British company, did the same thing. And from that British company, I then went on to Fannie Mae. Now, you might have heard of Fannie Mae, but you have to keep your Fannie Mae scandals straight, all right? This is I went to Fannie Mae post-accounting scandal and pre-subprime meltdown, okay? So this is after our accounting scandal, and we committed extensive fraud. Now, we only cooked the books to the tune of $6.3 billion, not Fannie Mae's $11 billion, and we only had to pay only a $400 million fine, okay? So same drill. After a scandal, you go in, and you put in place a code of conduct and an ethics helpline, and you train all the employees in the code and the helpline and how to make better ethical decisions. And so that's how it became. So this is what happens. This is what happens when you have people who work for you with too much time on their hands. So this got inserted into a presentation I made a few years ago. And I know a good joke when I steal it, so I've been using it since then. What does this have to do with you? Well, about 5 years ago, I saw a job opening here at Notre Dame at Mendoza teaching business law. And so I went home one day and I said, honey, how would you like to sell everything and move to South Bend, Indiana? And imagine her surprise. But we did, and good woman that she is, she agreed. And so there's Allison, and we've now been here at Mendoza for the last 5 years. So ethics in the Mendoza College of Business, what does all this have to do with you? Well, I guess I'm going to assume most of you have seen A Christmas Carol. And whether you saw the Bill Murray version or the Muppet version or the Mr. Magoo version, you know the Ghost of Christmas Future. I sort of feel sometimes like I'm the Ghost of Christmas Future, that I've seen the ethical dilemmas that you'll see in your careers. And so that gets us to Mendoza. Having worked out in the business world for 20 years, I can say you should be happy and excited about going to a place where ethics is part of the conversation. If Carolyn were here, Dean Wu, our former dean, she would say ethics is in our DNA. It's part of what makes a Notre Dame education special, part of what makes a Mendoza education special. It's part of what employers look for. It's a discriminator. So be happy that you're at a place like Mendoza at Notre Dame. I said it's part of what makes us different and special. Along the way, you'll be taking an intro to ethics class probably next year, 1 credit class, and then you've got a choice of a number of different ethics electives. I've highlighted the 2 at the bottom. Those are 2 1 credit electives that I teach. And the idea here is that you'll take the 1 credit class, maybe some electives, but then ethics will also be part of the curriculum. So there should be a conversation about ethics in all your classes. So it's not like you're going to take intro to ethics and then go off to accounting and learn how to cook the books, right? In accounting, hopefully they're going to teach you how to engage in ethical accounting as well. So with that, let me stop because I've been doing some talking. Any questions so far? No, quiet bunch. All right. All right, well, let's talk about business ethics, and let's frame it this way. I'm here to tell you that without ethics, there is no business. I said ethics is integrated throughout the curriculum. One of the things you'll do in sophomore year if you take business law, at least historically, this is probably going to change, you'll read business as a calling, or at least historically sophomores have in business law. And the book is good for a variety of reasons. One of those, it talks about business as a calling. You know, when you think of callings, you think about the priesthood or becoming a nun or maybe a teacher or a doctor. And I'm here to tell you that you can be called to business and it's just as worthy and just as noble as any other calling. It also talks about the good that businessmen and women do. And it also talks about the fact that without ethics, there is no business. Business relies on trust, right? Investors want to know that books and records are accurate before they invest. Customers want to know that they're dealing with an ethical company. You're all going to be job applicants someday. You want to know that you're applying to ethical companies that are going to treat you right, not just up to the letter of the law, but to the spirit of the law. Beyond sort of the baseline of business ethics, I'd also submit to you that ethics is good for business. So there's a magazine called Ethisphere, and they track the world's most ethical companies. They come up with a list of the world's most ethical companies every year, and they put together an index, and they track the financial performance, the stock performance of those companies versus the S&P 500. So my question for you, have you done any everywhere polling? Pull out, here's something you don't hear in many of your classes. Pull out your cell phones, and you can vote. So look at this. According to Ethisphere magazine, its index of the world's most ethical companies, if you think it lags the performance of the S&P 500, you would send the message 164114 to, in my simple brain, phone number 37607, and on down the line. So you can vote on how you think the world's most ethical companies track the S&P 500. So again, you pick the answer you think is right, and you text that message, if you will, to 37607. So a little bit of a split. But most of you said exceeds performance by 10%, 25%. A few said 50%. And those few that said 50% are right. Now, I'm not here to tell you, my friend in the back, I'm not here to tell you that being ethical causes better financial performance. There's a difference between causation and correlation, but there is at least a healthy correlation between those companies that have good records of ethics and compliance and their financial performance. Okay? So just ask the shareholders of News Corp. I don't know if you remember last summer, News Corp had a little scandal, a little hacking scandal, and look at how their stock performed after the disclosure of that hacking scandal. It all started with Rupert Murdoch. Some of you may know Rupert Murdoch. He started with one paper in Australia many years ago, and he grew his media empire into Asia, into the UK, into Europe, into the United States, so that he now owns, among other things, Fox News and the Wall Street Journal. And the scandal involved hacking in the UK. That is, News of the World, a newspaper, a tabloid, worked through operatives to hack into the voicemail messages of some famous folks in the UK, Prince William, Jude Law, David Beckham, and sadly and most tragically, this is Millie Dowler. She was a schoolgirl who was murdered, and the police and the family apparently were able to recover her cell phone, and it appeared that she had checked her voicemail messages, giving the family hope that she was still alive. In fact, it was the operatives of the reporters who had hacked into her voicemail, and she was already dead. They also hacked into the voicemail messages of folks who were killed in terrorist bombings in London, soldiers who were killed in Afghanistan. And as a result, News of the World had to close. Several senior executives had to resign. The head of Scotland Yard had to resign. The Prime Minister's Director of Communications. News Corp was going to take over BSkyB, the biggest satellite broadcaster in the UK. That did not go through. And Rupert Murdoch, you might remember this, had to testify before Parliament last summer. And he said, "This is the most humble day of my life." This just recently, the son, so this is Rupert Murdoch's son, had to resign from BSkyB, and more to follow. This isn't over yet. If we were to go back 2 summers ago, I did a presentation somewhat similar to this, and we talked about BP and the oil spill in the Gulf. And I kind of joked before that nobody died in Worldcom's accounting scandal, but it's a bad joke because sometimes when businesses do the wrong thing, people do die. So in the BP oil spill, we had 11 folks die, sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. Just celebrated Easter, no more Easters, no more birthdays, no more Christmases, no more summer vacations. All gone. And you remember the images from that summer. Who could forget this? Right? This was on TV every day, all summer. Gulf was polluted, a region suffered, there was a fishing moratorium, restaurants were empty, beaches were empty, hotels were empty. And this just in, BP recently settled a class action, but the litigation is ongoing. This is just a piece of their liability. And so here at Mendoza, for all the obvious reasons, some of which I've stated and alluded to, we ask more of business. Okay, think about the quality goods and services that businesses, that ethical businesses deliver, right? They put food on our tables. They put clothing on our backs. They put roofs over our heads. They create something out of nothing. Business is inherently good. And those businesses hire people, and they create jobs. And those folks in the businesses, they pay taxes, and those taxes go to build schools and playgrounds and roads and bridges. And all that leads to prosperity. Okay? So I think probably sometimes we hear this message that business is bad, business is evil, right? Business people, businessmen and women, they exploit workers, they exploit the earth. It's not true. I mean, sometimes it's true, but by and large, business is inherently good. And you should remember that as you go about your business education. And then so a couple closing thoughts here at Mendoza. In addition to asking more of business, we ask more of you. So again, I was out there in the business world for 20 years. I worked for companies that were starving for ethical leadership. And I think the business world is still starving for ethical leadership. It's going to have to come from somewhere. I think it's going to have to come from you. It's a privilege, if you haven't realized this already, having gone through the college admissions process with my son, it's a privilege to go to Notre Dame. And if you were smart enough to get in here, you were smart enough to get in most anywhere. But this place is different and special. It's a privilege to go here. Make the most of it while you're here, and be worthy of it after you graduate and go off into the world. So with that, I'll ask if there are any questions. And say thank you. Questions? Yeah.
What did you major in?
Well, finance, and then I went off to, or as we used to call it, finance and business economics, I think, was. You could charge more if you called it finance and business economics. It's a longer name, so yeah, as a finance major, yeah. So it was after the accounting scandal, so I'm trying to go back now, so I guess it was probably 2000, after the accounting scandal. Basically, after there's a scandal, they hire folks to sort of clean house, and so I was sort of the new team, if you will. And so I was there for a year, and I would have happily stayed there, but for the job opening up here. And what none of us saw, which is interesting in retrospect, we worried about all kinds of risks at Fannie after the accounting scandal. For example, you'll all study Sarbanes-Oxley, so we worried about accounting risk and making sure our books and records were accurate. We kind of missed the core business risk, which was the real estate market and the mortgage market. And so that probably, we left in, started here 2007, I guess, and that was, what, 2008, September 2008, something like that, yeah. So got out just in time, I guess. Others? No. It's a quiet bunch. All right. And gentlemen, leave it at that?
One question.
Sure.
Could you give them an idea of a project that's taking place in your class, your ethics class?
So one of the classes, let's back up here. Give you So let's talk about these. So the managing ethics and compliance, so that's basically a class that's about compliance and ethics programs. So codes of conduct, ethics helplines, internal investigations. So it's a 1-credit class. We spend the first, maybe it meets 10 times on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think, 10 or 12 times. Let's say it's 10. The first 6 of those, we walk through what a compliance and ethics program is, and then you break up into teams, and we bring in, depending on how many students we have, 4 or 5 different companies. You examine their compliance and ethics program, and then you report back to the class. So in addition to just sort of reading a book and reading about what an ethics helpline is and reading about what a code of conduct is and reading about an internal investigation, you get to either meet in person with an ethics officer or over some kind of a webcast. and talk about their program. What does their ethics helpline look like? What does their code of conduct look like? How do they train their employees? And then you critique it based on what you've learned and report back to the class. So that's how that one works. Ethics and accounting, we study a variety. We talk about all the different ethical paradigms that you'll talk about in Intro to Ethics. We talk about some accounting-specific issues. And then you work in teams to pick an accounting dilemma and present back to the class on that. So they're both sort of a mix of typical classroom textbook, but then group projects and hopefully some real-world application. And I think the ethics and accounting, that's not all, but mostly seniors, and so they've had some experience in an accounting firm over their summer as an intern, so they've had a little taste of it. All right. Thank you.